What happens when a bold tariff gamble backfires, and the EU strikes back with a €100 billion threat? In 2025, Trump's aggressive 50% tariff on EU goods was meant to protect American industries, but it triggered a massive trade war that's now crippling US exports. With a 16% export drop, a 25% fall in agriculture, and consumer prices rising by 3.8%, the fallout is hitting hard. Will this end in negotiation or economic chaos? How will this impact your wallet, your job, or your business? Stay with us. We're breaking it all down. And don't forget to subscribe for more crucial updates. The legacy of President Trump's protectionist trade policies continued to shape U.S. economic strategy well into late 2024, when the United States imposed a sweeping 50% tariff on select imports from the European Union. This bold move aimed to address what the U.S. government described as unfair trade practices by EU member states and to reduce the persistent U.S. trade deficit with Europe. The tariffs targeted key sectors that the administration viewed as critical to American economic interests and national security. According to the latest report from the U.S. International Trade Commission in 2025, these tariffs impacted over $220 billion worth of European goods. The affected categories included some of the most significant industries in transatlantic trade, such as aerospace, where American manufacturers compete heavily with European firms, automobiles, especially luxury vehicles imported from Germany and other EU countries, and high-end luxury products that represent a substantial share of US imports from the region. The administration justified the tariffs by citing the need to protect domestic jobs and industries from what it described as predatory trade practices, including subsidies and regulatory barriers imposed by the EU. The move, however, was controversial and marked a sharp escalation in trade tensions, signaling a departure from decades of largely cooperative US-EU trade relations. The USITC's detailed analysis revealed that while the tariffs aimed to curb imports, they also risked increasing costs for American consumers and businesses, who rely on these European products either directly or as components in the broader supply chain. Economists warned that the tariffs might disrupt long-standing supply networks and provoke retaliatory measures. This aggressive tariff policy was a clear signal that the US was prioritizing economic nationalism over global free trade principles, setting the stage for the EU's subsequent countermeasures and escalating the trade conflict that continues to unfold in 2025. In March 2025, the European Commission announced a decisive response to the US tariffs by unveiling plans to impose retaliatory tariffs totaling €100 billion, approximately $108 billion. This move marked the most significant EU countermeasure against any trade partner since the 2018 US-China trade war, underscoring the severity of tensions between the EU and the US. The retaliatory tariffs specifically target a broad range of American exports that hold substantial economic value for the US. Key products on the list include US whiskey and motorcycles, sectors symbolizing American manufacturing strength and cultural export. Additionally, the EU focused on vital agricultural goods such as soybeans and corn, which are crucial components of US farm exports to the European market. These goods represent not only significant revenue sources for American farmers, but also essential trade goods that the EU heavily depends on. Beyond consumer products, the EU also targeted strategic industrial equipment and machinery that are integral to the US manufacturing and infrastructure sectors. The European Commission justified these tariffs as a necessary measure to protect EU industries and respond proportionately to the US's aggressive tariff policies. This retaliatory strategy reflects a broader shift in the EU's trade diplomacy, emphasizing a firm stance against protectionism while still leaving room for negotiation to resolve disputes. The Commission highlighted the importance of World Trade Organization rules and stressed that the EU remains committed to fair trade but will not hesitate to defend its economic interests. The €100 billion tariff plan has sent strong signals across global markets, raising concerns about prolonged trade conflicts and their potential to disrupt supply chains, increase costs for businesses and consumers, and slow down economic growth in both regions. This tit-for-tat escalation illustrates the rising stakes in transatlantic trade relations and the complex challenges that lie ahead. According to the latest data from the US Census Bureau, US exports to the European Union saw a significant downturn in the first quarter of 2025, with an overall drop of 16% compared to Q1 2024. This decline reflects the growing strain caused by escalating trade tensions and retaliatory tariffs between the two economic powers. The agricultural sector was hit hardest, experiencing a steep 25% reduction in exports to the EU. Key American farm products like soybeans and corn, which traditionally enjoyed strong demand in European markets, faced reduced access due to the newly imposed tariffs. This decline has raised concerns among farmers and agricultural businesses who rely heavily on exports for revenue. Similarly, the aerospace industry reported a 19% fall in shipments during the same period. This sector, a vital part of the US economy and one of its most technologically advanced industries, has seen weakened demand from European buyers. The tariffs have made American aerospace products less competitive, pushing some buyers to turn toward European and other international suppliers. The automotive sector also experienced a notable contraction, with exports to the EU decreasing by 14%. Luxury vehicles and automotive components, which form a large share of US-EU trade, were directly affected by the tariff barriers. The downturn in this sector has sparked worries about broader impacts on related industries and the supply chain. Highlighting the human cost behind these statistics, the US Chamber of Commerce issued a warning that the ongoing export declines could threaten the jobs of more than 500,000 American workers across various industries tied to EU trade. The reduction in export volumes not only impacts businesses, but also reverberates through local economies reliant on manufacturing and agriculture. These numbers paint a clear picture of the tangible economic challenges facing US exporters as the tariff conflict with the EU continues to escalate. The report from the Peterson Institute for International Economics highlights how escalating tariffs between the US and the EU are causing significant disruptions in global supply chains. These trade barriers have increased costs and created delays that are forcing companies around the world to rethink their supplier relationships and sourcing strategies. The analysis warns that continued tension could further destabilize trade-dependent industries and reduce overall economic efficiency, with long-term implications for global competitiveness and market stability if left unresolved. With tariffs driving up prices on imported goods and raw materials, many businesses are struggling to maintain efficient production timelines. As a result, manufacturers are searching for alternative suppliers outside of the US-EU trade corridor to avoid high tariff costs. This shift is not without challenges, as it requires investments in new logistics, renegotiations of contracts, and sometimes changes in product design to accommodate different materials. These adjustments have ripple effects throughout industries, contributing to widespread inflationary pressures globally. Consumers face higher prices on everyday goods, while companies grapple with increased operational costs. According to the report, sectors such as electronics, automotive, and machinery are among the hardest hit, given their reliance on complex international supply chains. The report also points out that these trade disruptions undermine years of progress toward just-in-time manufacturing, a system designed to minimize inventory and reduce waste. Companies now carry higher inventory levels as a buffer against unpredictable delays, further driving up costs. Furthermore, the tariff conflict has increased uncertainty in global markets, causing hesitation among investors and slowing down economic growth forecasts for 2025. The report emphasizes that unless trade tensions ease, these supply chain disruptions and inflationary effects will continue to hinder recovery and expansion in multiple industries. Overall, the findings underscore the urgent need for diplomatic solutions to restore stability and efficiency in global manufacturing and trade networks. The Bureau of Labor Statistics reported a notable 3.8% increase in consumer prices for imported goods affected by tariffs since early 2025. This rise demonstrates how tariffs are adding to inflationary pressures, directly raising the cost of living for many American families. Sectors like automotive and electronics have felt the impact most. Companies in these industries have largely passed the higher tariff costs onto consumers, resulting in steady price increases for cars, electronic gadgets, and related products. This pattern reflects a broader inflation trend affecting the overall economy. The price increases linked to tariffs have compounded inflation already driven by supply chain problems and volatile commodity prices. Many consumers now face a heavier financial burden as essential goods grow more expensive. The Consumer Price Index for goods affected by tariffs has consistently exceeded general inflation rates throughout the first half of 2025. Economists warn that these inflationary pressures could continue unless there is a resolution to ongoing trade conflicts. Higher prices for imported goods erode purchasing power, especially for middle and lower income households. Businesses must decide whether to absorb rising costs or pass them on to consumers, often leading to further price hikes. The Federal Reserve is closely monitoring these developments, carefully weighing their effects on monetary policy and potential interest rate adjustments throughout. The tariff-driven surge in consumer prices is complicating efforts to curb inflation while trying to maintain steady economic growth. This ongoing situation highlights the substantial role that tariffs are playing in shaping consumer prices, influencing inflation trends, and affecting the broader economic outlook in the United States in 2025. Policymakers face the difficult challenge of balancing inflation control without stalling recovery amid these trade tensions. Enjoying this? Subscribe now and hit the bell for updates. In 2025, growing concern over the economic consequences of the ongoing tariff dispute with the European Union has sparked strong political reactions throughout the United States. Lawmakers from both the Democratic and Republican parties have expressed increasing unease about how these tariffs are affecting critical sectors such as agriculture, manufacturing, and consumer goods. Several bipartisan bills have been introduced in Congress calling for a thorough review and possible rollback of tariffs enacted in late 2024. These efforts reflect a shared understanding that although the tariffs aim to protect American industries, they have instead raised costs and undermined export competitiveness. Key legislators have emphasized the difficulties faced by American farmers, particularly in crops like soybeans and corn, which have suffered from reduced access to European markets due to retaliatory tariffs. The manufacturing sector, especially automotive and aerospace industries, is also under pressure as exports decline and supply chains become increasingly strained. Consumer groups warn about the growing burden on households, as rising prices on everyday items are partly driven by tariffs pushing up costs. Meanwhile, White House officials maintain a cautious public stance, but confirm ongoing diplomatic talks with EU representatives aimed at de-escalating trade tensions. Senior advisors highlight the complexity of negotiations and stress the importance of balancing domestic economic protection with the need to preserve strong transatlantic economic relations. Economic experts note that bipartisan pressure signals a wider agreement that the current tariff strategy may not be viable in the long term. Calls to revisit trade policies are gaining strength as both parties recognize the risks posed by maintaining tariffs. US political leaders are increasingly urging pragmatic dialogue and negotiation to resolve the tariff dispute, restore economic stability, and promote growth throughout 2025. In 2025, the European Union adopted a strategic stance focused on protecting its economic interests amid ongoing trade tensions with the United States. The European Commission President has underlined a balanced approach that combines firm enforcement of retaliatory tariffs with a willingness to engage in constructive dialogue. The EU continues to impose tariffs designed to shield key industries from unfair competition and to respond to US trade measures. These tariffs aim to safeguard sectors critical to the European economy, such as steel, aluminum, and agricultural products, which have been negatively affected by US policies. At the same time, EU leadership stresses that these actions are not intended to escalate conflict, but to defend its markets within the framework of international trade rules. Central to the EU's position is a strong emphasis on fair trade practices and strict adherence to the regulations set by the World Trade Organization. The European Commission insists that both sides must comply with WTO guidelines to ensure a level playing field, prevent protectionism, and avoid damaging global economic stability. Despite the firm stance on tariffs, EU officials maintain that dialogue remains the preferred route to resolving disputes. Ongoing negotiations with the US are focused on finding common ground that respects each party's interests while reducing trade barriers. The EU advocates for transparent and cooperative discussions that can lead to mutually beneficial agreements and long-term solutions. Economic analysts highlight that the EU's diplomatic strategy reflects an effort to balance economic defense with openness to negotiation, recognizing that prolonged trade conflicts could harm global supply chains and economic growth. As 2025 unfolds, the EU remains committed to upholding its economic interests through measured action and persistent dialogue, aiming to restore stability and fairness in transatlantic trade relations. The World Trade Organization has urged the United States and the European Union to settle their trade disputes through peaceful and cooperative dialogue. emphasizing the need to follow established trade rules. The organization warns that ignoring these principles risks further damage to the international trading system. Data from the organization reveals that global trade growth slowed sharply to 1.2% in early 2025, one of the lowest rates in recent years. This decline is largely driven by rising protectionist measures, such as tariffs and retaliatory barriers, which have disrupted supply chains and increased costs worldwide. Experts caution that if trade tensions continue to escalate, the global economy could slide toward a recession. The uncertainty surrounding international trade policies has caused businesses to hesitate in making investments and long-term plans, further slowing economic progress. This weakening of global trade flows impacts not only major economies, but also developing countries that depend heavily on exports for growth and stability. In response, the organization is calling on member countries to renew their commitment to multilateral trade agreements and to work together in lowering tariffs and other trade obstacles. It stresses that open markets and predictable policies are vital for economic recovery and long-term stability. The ongoing dispute between the US and EU highlights the need for negotiation over confrontation, as prolonged conflicts threaten lasting damage to global economic health. Efforts focus on rebuilding trust in the international trade system by promoting transparency, fairness, and effective dispute resolution through established frameworks. As it unfolds, this organization remains a crucial player in facilitating dialogue and cooperation, aiming to keep global trade a key engine for economic growth and worldwide prosperity. Financial markets have shown significant turbulence in response to escalating trade tensions between the United States and the European Union. Following the announcement of new EU tariffs in 2025, the S&P 500 experienced a sharp decline, dropping 4.2% as investors reacted to the increased risk of prolonged economic uncertainty. This sell-off reflects widespread concerns that ongoing trade disputes could dampen corporate profits and disrupt global supply chains. Simultaneously, the US dollar weakened against the euro, falling by 1.8% in foreign exchange markets. This currency movement highlights investor apprehension about the potential economic impact of tariffs and retaliatory measures on the US economy. A softer dollar against the euro typically signals reduced confidence in the US economic outlook relative to the eurozone, especially amid fears of slowing growth. Market analysts suggest that the tariff-related uncertainty is fueling volatility not only in equities and currencies, but also in commodity prices, which are sensitive to shifts in global trade dynamics. Industries heavily dependent on international supply chains, such as technology, automotive, and manufacturing, have seen increased stock price fluctuations as investors weigh the risks of rising costs and supply delays. Additionally, bond markets have responded with a slight decline in yields on US Treasury securities, indicating a cautious stance as investors seek safer assets amid trade policy concerns. The mixed signals across various market sectors underline the complexity of navigating financial markets during periods of geopolitical tension. As 2025 continues, progress to ease trade conflicts. Stability in trade relations is considered vital for calming market volatility, restoring investor confidence, and supporting sustainable economic growth worldwide. Trade analysts have identified three possible paths as the US-EU tariff conflict continues to unfold in 2025, each carrying distinct economic and geopolitical implications. The first scenario envisions successful negotiations between the two sides, resulting in a gradual phased removal of tariffs. This approach could help restore confidence in global markets, ease supply chain disruptions, and encourage renewed investment. A diplomatic resolution would support economic recovery by lowering costs for manufacturers and consumers, ultimately stabilizing trade relations and fostering long-term cooperation. The second possibility involves further tariff increases and an escalation into a full-blown trade war. Such a development would intensify existing tensions, driving prices higher and worsening supply chain issues. This escalation could lead to more aggressive retaliatory measures, creating a cycle of economic damage on both sides of the Atlantic. Analysts warn that an expanded trade war would increase market volatility, reduce export opportunities, and slow overall economic growth in key sectors like automotive, electronics, and agriculture. The third outcome predicts a prolonged stalemate where neither side backs down, resulting in sustained uncertainty that strains broader geopolitical relations. This scenario could freeze negotiations, leaving tariffs in place for an extended period and prolonging economic pain. The ongoing conflict might disrupt alliances and weaken cooperation on other global issues, such as climate change and security. Businesses and investors would continue to face challenges from unpredictable trade policies, dampening growth prospects, and innovation. All three outcomes carry significant risks, and experts emphasize the urgent need for dialogue and compromise. As progress, the direction of this trade dispute will play a crucial role in shaping the future of transatlantic economic relations and the global trade landscape. In the end, this isn't just about tariffs. It's about how far nations will go to protect their own and what it costs the people caught in between. Will the US and EU find common ground before the damage gets worse? Or are we heading into a deeper economic storm that hits your wallet, your job, and your future? What do you think? Is this bold move a strength or a step too far? Can your business survive this global shakeup? Drop a comment below. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell for more real talk on what's shaping our world.